Hey everyone, welcome. And as always, we'll be out taking calls on Twitter Spaces. And if you raise your hand there, you're agreeing to ask your question. And in doing so, you'll be streaming out on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Rumble, YouTube, wherever we have our show. You'll find us there. Today, we're going to get into some interesting territory on mental health. You know, that's something that I like talking about as always. One guest is Emma Benoit. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who herself went through a major crisis as an adolescent and has her story to tell, and Greg Dicharry, who has had his own struggles with mental health disorders, now working hard on the service part of this, as I'm sure Emma is as well. So with your questions, you can call us at the Twitter Spaces. Again, just raise your hand there. I'll bring you up. And I'm watching as well with the Rumble Rants and the Restream, if you have other questions there. And when we start out, I'll maybe talk very briefly about something that came in from locals today. So let's get right to it.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real.
We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time.
Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
As I was saying, welcome. We appreciate you all being here. We will get right to our conversation about mental health. I want to talk a little bit about what's coming the rest of the week and even next week as well. We have Ed Lattimore in here. We have Marina Cohen-Stein in tomorrow. And the following week, I'm bringing a urologist. I think she's coming in next week. Someone I don't think necessarily wants to be identified, but came in from locals, and she was talking about urology, gynecology, and sexual abuse, which I have to tell you, having 35 years on Loveline, 20 of those years were spent dealing with the consequences of sexual abuse, both from the standpoint of the sort of mishandling by the medical system, people coming in with pelvic pain and urinary problems like you're discussing, and from the repetitive behaviors associated with trauma, people's pickers being broken, so to speak, which is stuff we can get into great detail with. But I do have a female urologist coming in here to talk about that stuff. But she spends most of her time putting implants in, as a lot of urologists do. So that is a lot of what female urologists seem to be doing these days. So there we go. Susan, everything good with you?
Excellent.
Excellent.
I had my ultrasound today.
Oh, yeah. How'd that go?
I guess I have a big uterus. I don't know.
Well, did they read it in the room?
It's like, no shit. I had triplets. No, they didn't. It's nothing. There's a tiny little fibroid. I don't think there's anything.
So there was no thickening of the lining, which is what
maybe,
I was expecting.
I don't know. She said the fibroid's not, she's not the doctor. Like, it's just the
Right.
Yeah.
So they're really not allowed to talk to you very much about it.
But we talked about, whenever I have a vaginal ultrasound, how it reminds me of when I got pregnant with quadruplets, and
Yes.
you announced, how am I going to put them through college?
Right. I did announce that.
The first thing you said.
I still was traumatized by that moment. And thank you for being sensitive to my feelings.
Well,
I
was like, how am I going to carry
I know it goes down as me being an asshole, but you're continuing to bring it up. And the fact that we pulled it off.
I was in stirrups. I was a little.
I understand.
Just, I was a little surprised.
I'd been sitting in the waiting room, reading a Newsweek, which was a magazine that used to be very popular, which was going on about the projected costs of 4 years of major university, and they were exactly spot on.
And he penciled one in, and he got 4, and 3 made it. But they all made it through school. You paid for that. You also got them through graduate school, and they kept most of the money we saved for them. So we did it. You did a good job. You manifested it. The kids are great. They came out alive.
That's what it took. Just thinking positively, and it all happened. That's all it took, everybody. Forget the never sleeping in the 18 hours a day of work.
Working that 6 television jobs.
Okay. But Susan, you also then very kindly, you'll text me horrible things during the day. And again, you did that today with somebody.
Oh, yeah. I like to send you the good stuff.
Yeah. Somebody who saw me on Kill Meat's show. And I want to read this to you because it shows you how.
I think it cracks me up. It's like people can always find something wrong with anything you say.
But it's also how they don't listen. And if you listened, if you actually heard what I said, you wouldn't get anywhere near what this guy's saying. So I want to show you guys what I contend with all the time. So he says, at the end of Kilmeade's show, you joked about Olympian Simone Biles. I was not joking. There was no joke. She had been given, there was a sort of a joke to the story, which was she'd been giving a coloring book by a flight attendant, and she reported on it. She was very good-natured about it. Simone was, and they acknowledged their mistake.
Oh, my God.
Okay. About her height, I joked, which I did not. I said she is 4'8", which is, you don't realize how small she is and how small gymnasts are. Then he says, and under your breath said secondary sexual, whatever that means at the end of the show, like no one would notice. What I said was that it's very common for gymnasts not to have secondary sexual characteristics. Now, you're an asshole and don't know what that means. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. But secondary sexual characteristics are sort of the things that make females look female. They're called secondary sexual characteristics. And if you notice, gymnasts maybe don't have so much of that. Maybe not so much.
They don't have
particularly
breasts.
when
they don't have hips.
Not so much. And so it goes, so shameful. No regard for her feelings of sexual abuse with the Olympics. Like, well, what
does that have to do with it?
Now we're talking about the mishandling by her physical therapist.
Oh, wow.
Think of others besides your dark humor. Okay.
Okay.
Here's the deal.
This is what Kilmeade goes through every day, though.
It's what I go through every day, to be fair.
Well, no, he was more of a Fox follower, so he didn't really like your
whatever. The point is, people have forgotten how to read and how to listen. So in every time I am faced with somebody upset about something, it's never what I said. It's always what somebody heard. So listen carefully, everybody, or what somebody said I said. So I think it's really important to go back to your source and go, what did you mean by that? What were you actually saying? Maybe I didn't hear it correctly. That's all I'm saying.
What amazes me is that they take time out of their day to find a way to contact you and then just yell at you. That's going to do something for
what I said
the better good.
What I said was, essentially, Simone was good-natured about it. It's really serious. Like, well, I can imagine she might have been upset, but she's 4'8". You don't realize how small she is. And because I was running out of time, I said, and gymnasts may not have, I said something like may have had significant secondary sexual characteristics, meaning hard to identify as an adult. That's all I was saying. And then we went on to the next topic, by the way. So you see how short people's triggers are.
They do like a rapid fire on that show, right?
Yes,
where they ask you a bunch
thing.
of questions in a row and you just kind of keep it entertaining, you know?
Thank you, Slapdash. I appreciate that. Yeah, it is never...
I mean, Drew's out to insult people. That's what he thinks all day. Like, I'm going to insult a gymnast today because
I'm insensitive.
Because that's my goal. Like,
yeah.
God.
Insensitivity is what I try to... And by the way, if I am doing something or off base on something, I'm very interested in hearing about it. I always like to adjust my position.
We should send him over to After Dark and see what he says about that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Who knows? Oh, your buddy Jahep is over at Rumble Rant, so you can go tweet on with him. Let's proceed and bring our guest in. Let me get the information up here if you don't want. Yep, Emma Benoit was a cheerleader, popular cheerleader, supportive family, but was actually suffering from a depressive disorder. There was a suicide attempt, ultimately, that left her paralyzed, and she now raises awareness about the teen suicide, let's call it pandemic, which is really what it is. There is Emma's story there. And we also have, as a guest, we've got Greg Dicharry, I beg your pardon, Greg Dicharry. He himself was living in Hollywood, pursuing working in the entertainment industry, but was hospitalized with co-occurring bipolar and substance disorders. So Greg is now a youth empowerment expert, mental health advocate, and filmmaker. So let's bring them both in here. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining me.
Hi.
You. So I kind of feel like we should start with Emma's story since it's kind of dramatic, and I just want to give you a chance to talk about it. And I would just say that both of you could not come along at a more important time. I'm sure you're aware in this COVID era, not just the anxiety and confusion around COVID that we've infected, particularly 8 to 15-year-olds with, who are now 10 to 17, or maybe even 11 to 18-year-olds, but we have blocked them from developmental milestones. We've deprived them of education, depending on which state you're in, and we've prevented them from having the kind of social contact and meaning that sometimes help kids reduce their risk of mental health struggles. But so now we're in this era, and Emma, a great time for you to tell your story.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way that everything worked out is very fortuitous, and I attribute God to that all the way. But my story kind of started as early back as elementary school. When I was a little kid, I can remember having some pretty significant anxieties and never really understanding what it was. Mental health was not something, at least in my community, that was really talked about or emphasized. And just to be quite transparent, I hadn't heard the words mental and health used together until my own suicide attempt. So I was really in the dark with what mental health was and how it affects us. But my anxieties really started to take hold in elementary school. And then obviously, as I got older, things became more serious, more daunting, more challenging. And I never developed a set of coping skills. And I never developed even an understanding of what it was I was dealing with mentally and emotionally. So when it came to reaching out for help or, letting people in, I wasn't. I was completely sheltering my own feelings and thoughts because of the lack of understanding and because of the stigma. I was really trapped under that stigma for a long time.
And I'm guessing, just the way you're describing the development of your disorder, there's sort of different kinds of anxiety disorders. You're describing what sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, an anxiety disorder that goes more towards obsessive compulsive disorder. So I'm guessing you had intrusive thoughts and rituals and all that stuff you went through. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. My anxieties, what started out as my mom has suffered with anxiety my whole life, and it was very apparent to me. We never went on trips. She never wanted to fly. We never went on a cruise. She was always very anxious fearful, mainly just fearful. And so that I kind of watched her experience that. And then myself, it was more along the lines of social anxiety, feeling like I have to check all these boxes in a group of friends, or I have to filter what I'm going to say before going into a conversation. So that's kind of what my anxiety looked like in the early days. But then obviously, as I got older, things became more troubling for me and they lingered on my head, and that caused the feeling of anxiety.
You didn't have any of the prolonged rituals where you had to do things every morning before you could leave the house and all that kind of stuff?
No, I wasn't. I wouldn't say that. I was not in that frame of anxiety. It was more along the lines of
Got it.
self-conscious anxiety, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Got it. And so you mentioned stigma, and I feel like we've done a lot of good work with stigma in recent years, and yet adolescents in particular are fearful of speaking out, right? They don't want to be different. They want to be, seen as, perceived a certain way by their peers. How do we get adolescents to be willing to talk about these things more readily?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we can do is just normalize it as a whole. I think part of my experience and what the stigma really did to me and for me was the fact that I always felt like in the eyes of adults, I had to have it all together. I had to have it figured out. I couldn't struggle for a long period of time with something. I have to figure it out for the adults. And I think youth oftentimes get trapped into thinking that adults have this mentality that youth have it so much easier nowadays, and that everything should be, there is no reason for anxiety if you're a youth. That's the mentality that youth have when it comes to adults. So I think it's just a matter of shifting that mentality and normalizing this topic and conversation as a whole, and letting the youth know that anyone at any stage of life can struggle with a mental illness or anxiety or anything like that.
Yeah, you're putting your finger on something very important, I think, which is that parents don't realize how much kids, well, there's sort of two versions of it. Kids generally want their parents to be proud and happy with them and about them, almost without exception. But in some family systems, and in particular, and I'm not taking aim at your family, and it's nothing unusual about what you were dealing with, but we live in the age of narcissism, and so kids are sort of extensions of parents a little bit more than they used to be, and a lot is asked of them, and that can be overwhelming, and the idea of not living up to that can be shattering.
Absolutely. And that was something that really harped on me in my teen years specifically, was the fear of failure. I always just wanted to please mom and dad. I always wanted to make them happy and proud. And I knew that the behaviors that I was doing and my passions and interests weren't really things that would make them proud. So obviously self-consciously, that was a trigger for my anxiety. And I feel like that's common with amongst majority of teenagers, is they just want to please their parents, but it's a challenge.
Excuse me. Let me bring, and I think I mispronounced your name. Is it Benoit or Benoit?
Benoit.
Benoit, beg your pardon. Let's bring Greg in here. Not unusual what she's talking about. I wonder what your thoughts are, Greg.
No, I mean, you asked the golden question there as far as how do we get young people to get over that stigma. And I think stigma is often an overused word that kind of complicates, things. But, we did a school presentation, a whole district where we did 5 schools in a day and did assemblies. And I would ask the kids at the beginning of every session was, if you were struggling, would you rather ask somebody for help, go to a professional, go to a parent, or would you rather just keep it to yourself? A good 80 to 90% of the kids said they'd rather keep it to themselves, because they, and valid reasons from a kid's perspective, because people will look at them different. Maybe they'll get thrown in the hospital. They'll have to take medication. So we really need to address that issue because, you can have the greatest services in the world, but if kids aren't willing to say that they need help, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. And, we're the 3 white people are speaking from a particular perspective. I know dealing with people of color and with economically distressed populations, there's a whole other layer of essentially, well, first of all, some folks are in survival mode and can't even identify these issues as mental health. But others really don't trust. I mean, they wouldn't trust us. We don't look, And so how do we? And by the way, they should. I'd be delighted to help, and I have helped many, many times. But that's just another layer of sort of denial about this. And denial is a weird, troubling problem in mental health these days. So I'll give you each a chance to sort of address denial. Greg, you first.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something that happens on the parent level, like as far as, communities of color, oftentimes that self-stigma is even worse. They don't want people to think they're a bad parent because their kid has mental health issues. And, therefore, the young person doesn't want to be labeled as that. So, for my own recovery, the denial piece was just something really having to get over, because if that's not addressed, or you get to a point where you're really knowing and truly believing that 1, you have an issue, and 2, that, there's something you can do to address that issue, you're not going to take the steps necessary to, heal and really begin that recovery process.
I'll have Emma address this in just a second, but I want to zero back into Greg, because Greg, you had 2 disorders that are associated with severe lack of insight and denial. And in my experience, you add bipolar and addiction together, or substance use disorder, you almost are in a biological state of denial, right? I mean, you really don't see it. You just don't see it. And even when I would, hold the mirror up, patients go, I don't know what you're talking about. And so, you have any special strategies for those, many of them on the streets these days, many of them, doing all kinds of goofy stuff that's not good for them? I'll take your advice.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. When I was living in LA back in the day, and listen, you on K-Rock, not that has anything to cause an effect on what I'm about to tell you, but I was,
thank you for that.
I was starting to
helped immensely.
I was smoking a lot of high octane marijuana at the time. I was working, doing a music video, sleeping less and less, and I started to just kind of trip out, for lack of a better word. Ended up being arrested and walking naked down Martin Luther King Boulevard. I was hospitalized at Cedars-Sinai, and that was the first time they told me I was bipolar and had substance use, issues. And, I was in complete denial. One, what I had experienced on the mental health side was so real to me, I couldn't really buy that it wasn't real. And then on the substance use,
well, explain what you mean by that. Explain what you mean by that, because I know what you mean by that, but I don't think the average person will get quite what you're talking about. That your delusions were real. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you hear it referred to as like the messianic complex or whatnot, but feeling this kind of special connection with God. I was following the Son. I was this, chosen one, so to speak, and kind of being sober, but still kind of seeing and hearing things and having these very real experiences that were 100% real to me. I knew they sounded crazy to everybody else, but to me they were real. So, how do you break through that? It's difficult, to say the least. And then the substance use thing, I had always, said I was going to be an 80-year-old man smoking marijuana on the porch. I could debate you for days around the, how marijuana was better than, alcohol and all those kind of things. But, with someone bipolar, like you say, mixing those two things, it's like when I would start to get manic and smoke marijuana, it's like I might as well have been smoking PCP, because I would just go off the rails to
and these days the kind of cannabis that's being used, the dabs and the wax and all that stuff, it's much more common seeing what you're talking about than it used to be. So Emma, your story on denial. I'm sure people ask, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, absolutely. That mine was totally and utterly self-denial. I think part of the reason why I felt such a need to have such a strong sense of denial was because of the shame that I carried with having these emotions, and the guilt that I carried with feeling the way I did about my life, because I was always in a state of comparison. I would always compare myself and my problems and struggles to others. And so that really put me in a position where I felt immense guilt. I felt like, shame on me for feeling so poorly about my life. It's so privileged and I have everything, but then you beat yourself up for feeling that way on top of those negative feelings. So my denial was honestly kind of like a protective mechanism for me, if you will. I kind of used it as my advantage to kind of keep away people and let people know, like, I'm untouchable.
And for adolescents, it's because they're not super connected to their feelings, and they don't have a clear sense of themselves in the sense that they can step outside of themselves and look at themselves. That's not kind of an adolescent thing. You're not there yet with that, which puts you just in it, and it gets very difficult to be objective then. Yeah. And absolutely. How was your treatment, Emma? What did you do to get better?
Well, I unfortunately had a suicide attempt. All of these years of struggling silently culminated and led me to attempting suicide. And honestly, I feel like what really expedited my journey was the regret that I felt immediately after making the attempt. I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I knew that I had made a mistake. And I really had the opportunity to gain those abilities to take a step outside of myself in a way and look at myself, like you said. But I really attribute the physical injuries that I had to how my recovery happened for me, because I was immediately paralyzed after my attempt. So going through that physical journey really taught me a lot. It taught me values and everything. So, and
yeah,
of course, I went to
Yeah, go ahead. You went to?
I went to therapy, of course, as well after the attempt.
Yeah.
So.
You have two interesting sort of phenomenon there with you. One is that it's a very common thing that people that survive, like jumps off bridges and stuff like that, when they report the experience, they'll say the first thing that they feel when they jump off the bridge is, I made a huge mistake. First thing, this was a giant mistake. And then the other thing is that in spite of injury and loss, you can find gratitude, purpose, spiritual connection. I hear these stories all the time. And you'd sort of glossed at spirituality as part of your program. What's going on there?
Well, my faith was born from my attempt. I was not a person of faith. I really had no connection to anything spiritual until I was physically saved. And then I was spiritually saved as well right after that. And really, like you said, losing so much, losing all of my abilities, really did put things into perspective for me. And it showed me just how much I do have to be grateful for. And all of those experiences really did lead me to my faith in God. And now I'm a Christian, and I believe in God and Jesus Christ, and I live my life through that. And it really has been one of the biggest helping factors in my mental health journey is my relationship with God. And I always encourage people to try it out. Obviously, it's not for everyone. And I want to mention that, coming from the South, there is kind of this stigma that, if you just pray about it, it'll go away and you can pray these things away. And that's not the case at all. My faith absolutely helped me in this journey, but it wasn't that alone. It definitely took a lot of work and time to get to the point I'm at right now.
Yeah, and again, I've treated many people, and a spiritual component, whatever that is, to the given individual, and that's all over the place. People have all kinds of different ways of having that experience, but it's always an important part. Greg, I'm guessing that was important for you too. And my other question is, did you help Emma, or do you guys? I'm not clear why I have you guys together today.
Sure. So I had been having the dream of working in film when I was in LA. All these manic episodes all started, the first few happened while doing film projects. So that dream was pretty much broken. And I started working in the mental health field and started a youth program nationally. And I, years later, got a camera and started doing little videos. I later connected with a guy, Kevin Hines, who was somebody who did jump off a bridge, the Golden Gate, and survived. And we had done a documentary and about 5 years ago, and we were doing a premiere here in Baton Rouge, and we were doing a panel discussion after the film. And my sister had found Emma online, and I reached out to her and asked her if she wanted to be on the panel. And so that's how we connected. I ended up, asked her if I could bring my camera to go, kind of prep her for the panel, and having no intention of doing another documentary on suicide, but just her story was so compelling. Sometime later, we teamed up to do this documentary, and we've just been on this journey, trying to use it to help spark conversations, help spark, enhancing suicide prevention efforts in local communities. And, thankful we've been able to do a good amount of that so far.
Where can people see it?
So right now we're just doing a community screening. So we're having both community screenings online and in person. Emma's doing quite a bit of travel. Basically with a topic like this, it's real beneficial and impactful to see it in groups. We're planning, we have kind of set up a PBS broadcast, national broadcast. We're just, have that opportunity. We're still looking for underwriters and that sort of thing. But, one day we'll have it on, streaming.
I'm looking for it. It's a worthy project. But I can imagine having Emma there to answer questions afterwards is really part of the power of what you guys are delivering. So, and again, if they want to be a part of something like this, is there a website they go to? myascension.us?
Yeah, they can go to myascension.us, and we're real active on Facebook, on My Ascension, and Instagram, and that sort of thing. So we'd love people to connect with us. And, we work with a lot of different organizations around the country that are doing this work and collaborating. There's literally thousands of organizations around the country. A lot of them are, we call like moms or family members lose a kid to suicide and they start a nonprofit and, are doing great works in their local community. So we've been blessed to be able to kind of link up some of those.
And since you've had the substance history too, I mean, you can do a lot of work on that side too. I mean, the kids are getting lost hand over fist to fentanyl right now. Mm-hmm. We are going to take a little break. I've got lots of people with their hands up that want to come to the fore here and ask questions. I assume it's of you guys, but we'll see. And on my restream, I have a bunch of armchair comedians. And pull back on Greg for me, Caleb, if you don't mind. Because I'm going to show you something. Pull back.
We like your set.
Don't say
we like your set.
Pull back. Just give me a full, just give me Greg.
A full
Caleb.
Screen.
Yeah, either a full screen or at least 2/3 of the screen with just Greg. There you go. So behind you, there are these giant X's, and my
on your barn door.
My restream has decided that this is.
I love the color scheme, by the way.
X gets the square. You're on Hollywood Squares. If you look behind you, it really looks like the circle gets the square where your head is, and X gets the square.
Or Family Feud. That's even fun.
No,
I love that.
That's
I love that
square reference.
I'm a big fan of Malcolm X, and I love orange. And I was a bit manic one day, and I decided to paint the X's on the door orange.
And
I like it.
Peter Marshall. Peter Marshall would love it, and so would, oh shoot, what's his name from Dance with the Stars?
When Drew was on Loveline, the TV show, he and Adam were on Hollywood Squares.
It's the voice.
Tom Bergeron. Tom Bergeron was the Tom Bergeron was the guest then.
Should bring that show
was the
back.
host then, rather. Yeah. All right. So let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll get right to calls. Here we go. I think we have found the holy grail of skincare. Genucel has absolutely changed, certainly my skincare regimen. I like that vitamin C serum, the under eye creams, skin nourishing primer. Susan loves the eyelash enhancers, uses it on her eyebrows as well. Genucel has everything to make us both feel and look amazing. Best part, the quality of the products. Using pure ingredients like antioxidants, copper peptides, and a proprietary calendula flower base, Genucel knows how to formulate products to perfection without irritation. For Susan, she hates that annoying dry area under her nose during allergy season, like right here. She's tried everything, but no matter what, the skin is flaky and dry. Nothing seemed to help until she started using Genucel's Silky Smooth XV Moisturizer. It soaked right into the skin. She was hooked after one use and now loves all of their products as well.
I am a snob when it comes to using products on my face. The dermatologist makes a ton of money from me. But when I was introduced to Genucel, I was so happy because it's so affordable and it works great. I was introduced to the Ultra Retinol Cream, which I love at night. All the eye creams are amazing. People notice my skin all the time, and I'm so excited because it's actually working.
Right now, you can try Genucel's most popular collection of products and see what I'm talking about for yourself. Go to Genucel.com and enter code DREW for 10% off. That is GENUCEL.com, and the code is DREW.
Back, chest.
So, Caleb, we have no idea if that sound went out because it didn't come into our studio
and I don't know if you can hear us.
Or into the Twitter spaces. So we gave commentary to the Twitter spaces, but I don't know if the rest of the ad went out over the restream.
Can you hear me now?
Caleb?
Can you hear me?
Can anybody hear us?
We can't hear anything.
Wait.
No, they didn't hear. Tom Cigars came through. Oh, wait, sound is good.
Can everyone hear me?
Oh, we didn't hear. Yeah, we're good, but the
so we are having technical difficulties.
Yeah, we lost our Atlanta.
The only people that can hear us
connection.
are probably Twitter right now. So
all right. Well,
if the audience can hear me,
streaming out,
put it in the
it's
chat.
Just we lost the Alabama connection.
I can't hear Caleb.
I can't either, but I think I can still take calls. So let's go do it, shall we?
Well, let's see if anybody.
I can hear Caleb if that matters.
All right.
Okay.
Anthony, we're going to get you connected up here. I hear it loud and clear on my end. Oh, there we are. We got everybody back from Alabama. But hold on, let's take Anthony. Before you speak, give me 1 second here. Caleb, are you back with us?
Don't cough into the mic.
Can you hear me now? Drew?
I can't hear Caleb.
No, we can't.
I can't. Maybe the guest should talk to and see if.
Can you hear?
I
hear you.
Oh, we see you now. Now it sounds very weird. But
I can hear Caleb.
We didn't get the commercial at all. We didn't get the sound on the commercial. And we did a voiceover for the Twitter spaces.
I know.
That's so weird. I think the audience can hear me.
Out, and
go to drdrew.com.
And we really can't hear you at all right now. But we hear our callers over at Twitter spaces. So.
Yeah, I can hear that. I can't hear the guest.
Food.
Uh-oh. Now everybody froze.
And I'll get to Anthony in the meantime.
Okay, Anthony.
Anthony, go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Dr. Drew. Thank you, Susan. You guys kind of hit a nail on the head with the suicide rate when it comes to like urbanized areas. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a mentality of you can't look to the next day. You're currently stuck in the here and now.
Yeah.
And growing up homeless, growing up with no money, we didn't know where we're going to eat. As a kid, that brings on so much trauma, especially, I mean, I had a very rough childhood, especially growing up in the Hispanic community. You're pretty much deemed, weak if you admit that you're struggling. Yeah. And that's one of the things we're not allowed to do is say we're struggling, we can't make it. I mean, for God's sakes, growing up with two parents who were maladaptive but tried their best, that's another issue. It's like this compound trauma that we're dealing with systemically now, where do we stop and reassess where we're at? I mean, growing up, I'm one of the very few. I became a therapist, and instead of going the other way, I mean, I was selling drugs with my dad at the age of 8. I was holding the bag. I didn't know at the time. These were just common things. And then trying to understand why we had no house, why we lived in motels, why were we always begging for money? There's instances where I would grow up in a hotel or motel, and there wouldn't be food on the table. I'd have to go to the lobby, and it was like a mom and pop type of motel, and I would eat Indian food with the Indian family that owned the place because they knew I had no food. As you grow up, though, and nobody explains anything to you in the field that I work with my clients, that's the number one thing I do here is no one explained to us that this was not okay, that being not okay was okay. It was, you got to suck it up, you got to keep going on, and if you don't, you get left behind. It was adamant in school. You were not to tell anybody that you were homeless because you would be picked on. You would be targeted. You had kids that looked down on you, just like your guest said. The kids don't want to be chastised or outcasts in the school setting because many times that's where we find our solace is in school because we have our teachers, we feel safe, we don't have to worry about somebody coming to steal the bag that we're holding that has drugs, we don't have to run. But then where do we talk about it? And that's one of the things that I struggle with in the field is how do I get these kids to talk about these things? And one of the things I'm kind of coming to the realization that's hard to realize is we can't save everybody. We just can't. It's not doable.
Well, let's get Greg in on this first, I'd say, because you're asking the question we all struggle with, and you're bringing up the issue of trauma, which we've not yet talked about, but that's a major issue in all of this as well.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of, great issues. I mean, the trauma issue is huge, even today, even if you get people from a point to thinking that trauma is more than just what you get at war and recognizing sexual trauma and things like that. I'd seen something for a speaker where he was talking about, post-traumatic stress, but he was saying, which is what we talk about the military, but now we got so many kids that it's not post-traumatic stress, it's current traumatic stress. They're living in these, neighborhoods and environments where we're riddled with drugs and violence and, parents that aren't great parents. And so, and that produces a lot of responses that are often mental health issues or things that present similarly. But I think what you were describing of becoming a counselor is so tremendous, and having more people from those communities as well as people with that personal lived experience is really crucial. And I know back from when I was in school, I think, and it's changed a lot over the years, but they would have this with kind of the code of ethics that you're not supposed to divulge anything about your personal life or experience. But I guarantee, in the work that you're doing, if you able to share a little bit with people that, where you've come from, where you've been, that's going to be tremendously beneficial for them. Because it's kind of the same thing with what Emma and I are doing, is sharing your experience to help others.
Emma, you want to comment?
No, no.
Okay, good. I mean, that sort of says it all. And Anthony, thank you for the work you do. As I'm a fan, and
I'm a fan of yours too.
I agree. I agree with Greg wholeheartedly that it's one thing to be careful in a closed setting with intensive psychotherapy with what you divulge about yourself, but if you're in front of a group of kids that are suffering and you want to reach them, you tell them your story. You go ahead and do that. I think it's completely impactful. And,
did you think that Anthony is Anthony Brown?
No.
Oh no,
I don't.
Different Anthony.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we're the two other. You guys always get us mixed up with Anthony Brown and Anthony Garcia. I'm the psychologist or a psychotherapist. Anthony Brown is just the man when it comes to
the man.
But Anthony,
he is the man. I love Anthony.
Anthony Brown is the man. But Anthony Garcia, give a brief plug on your organization.
Yeah, so we are the Spread Hope Like Fire. The Spread Hope Like Fire Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I founded it to break the stigma on mental health. Anthony Brown is actually going to be on the podcast, thanks to Dr. Drew, connecting us. It's just us getting together and humanizing our humanistic struggle. That's one of the things too that I've noticed, that we can't break down all these issues with the mental health because none of us want to buy into the fact that we are in the human condition. And to buy into that, you have to agree you're going to have to suffer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Not just suffer, but recognize that you are finite, biological. You get sick like anybody else, and the brain gets sick like any other organ. And yeah, it has a social and an interpersonal context, but it has a treatment also. Thanks, Anthony. I got lots of other questions I want to get to here. So this is Choose to Live, another another organization. It sounds like we'll get her coming up here. I don't know who the speaker is. Go ahead and unmute your mic.
Is it me that's on?
It is you that's on.
Hi, Emma. Hi, Greg. My name is Robin Walsh, and I am also a suicide survivor. So I have a question for Emma.
Okay.
I started a nonprofit called Choose to Live in Lee Summit, Missouri, and we are so blessed to be able to. We're going to be showing your documentary August 11th. So I want to thank you for everything and for allowing others to share your story across the world. I have two questions. One, everybody that I talk to and share your story wants to know how you're doing with your walking. And then I personally have a question for you. When I advocate for breaking the stigmas and speaking out about suicide awareness, and I come across a family who has lost a loved one by suicide, do you have survivor's guilt? There are times that when I share my story and I share how grateful I am to be here after my suicide attempt at the age of 21, and now when I advocate, I sometimes feel guilty that I'm here and their child isn't. So did you go through a feeling of survivor's guilt when you talk and meet with these families who did lose somebody?
Good question.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for reaching out, and I'm so grateful that you are going to be showing the film. It means the world to me that you are using my story in that way to help others. And absolutely, I definitely had some survivor's guilt in the very beginning when sharing my story. But something that really has shifted that mentality for me has been sitting with loved ones that have been left behind and just talking to them and letting them express what they have to share with me, and asking them questions about their loved one that has passed away seems to put a different tone on the conversation. But I think what really shifted that whole survivor's guilt feeling for me was hearing from loved ones that were left behind that hearing my testimony, hearing my story doesn't make them feel any type of way negatively. It makes them feel at a sense of peace. And that's just strictly from what they've told me, from me sharing my story with them. They've just said that, when you share your story and your journey, specifically the part about how I had instant regret, that gives them a sense of peace. And it also kind of allows them to think about their loved one in a different way. But definitely dealt with some survivor's guilt in the beginning, but certainly not anymore. And then to answer the question about my walking, I am no longer in physical therapy at the moment. And that's mainly because I have recovered to the point where I am comfortable with my life. I can walk my walker. I use my walker every day. The only time I use my wheelchair is out and about, like out in public and stuff like that for endurance purposes. But I have regained all feeling. I'm fully can feel every part of me, and I have regained full muscle activation in all of my limbs, minus my left hand is still paralyzed. But aside from that, I'm fully functional. I'm not able-bodied, but I have a disability, but I have a lot more abilities than I did in the beginning. So.
Wow, how fortunate. So is it coordination of the lower limbs? So it's like this spinal cerebellar tract, something like that? Injured?
So my injury, so my injury was to the spinal cord. I had a blood clot form on my spinal cord pushing down from C5 to T2. And then after that, I suffered several strokes. So I'm dealing with the spinal cord injury and the stroke injury. Mainly just the coordination and endurance is the factor that
I'm sorry to ask such a specific question, but I hope you don't mind. But it's fascinating to me. Did you Did you have a tear in one of your spinal arteries or something? The stroke is so unexpected.
Yeah. So I guess I should give some context. So my attempt was by firearm. I shot myself in the chest, and the bullet entered and exited through just below the base of my skull. And because of the entry and exit of the bullet, it caused a lot of internal bleeding. And that's what caused the blood clot to form on my spinal cord. And after that, I suffered strokes during surgery to repair the artery with a stent. But the blood clot was there for several days in the hospital, and they think that because of the time that it was sitting there, it was causing permanent bruising to the spinal cord. But once they got the clot removed, then I could begin progressing in therapy. But there is that type of damage, yeah.
So let me explain to people. So it sounds like you nicked an artery, probably one of the spinal arteries, which is why they had to go in and put the stent in, and that's where the stroke happened as a complication of that procedure. But there was an arterial bleed into the essentially subdural space of the spine, which pushed on the spine arterial pressure. It's much like getting a bleed in the top part of the head. It can be quite devastating, and it injures the spine. That pressure injures it, but it sounds like a lot of it came back, which is amazing. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep.
I want to say that real quick. My carotid artery was severed, so that was the initial
carotid artery. So it was a carotid artery injury. Okay, got it. Okay. All right, we're going to get Hunter up here and get his questions. Hunter, go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Drew. I just wanted to go back to what Greg was saying. I really identified with that. I myself am bipolar and a recovering alcoholic. I've been there, thinking delusions are real and then coming back down and realizing like how embarrassing that is to try to explain that to people. And I think that ties back into social stigma. Society making us feel ashamed for being different or going through really intense personal experiences that most others won't. So I just wanted to thank Greg for saying that.
I totally agree with you, Hunter, that it's great that Greg is speaking about it, great that you are speaking about it. But I would argue it's that, think about it this way. This is the way I think about it. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. That we have shrouded mental health in secrecy throughout human history, as opposed to helping people go, oh, would Hunter have these feelings of inflation and he doesn't sleep and he's spending a lot of money and he thinks he's connected to the sun or something. Oh, that's that's easy to identify. That's his bipolar disorder. Let's go help him. As opposed to what's wrong with Hunter. You know what I mean? There should be no stigma around it. It should be an easy putt for people to go, oh, I know what that is. That's this brain thing that makes Hunter behave like that when he's drinking or whatever. Would that be a more helpful way to do it?
I think that definitely there's a ton of confusion shrouded around mental illness. I think that people should be more vocal when they're experiencing mental health issues so others can start to learn, these are things that real people do go through.
Common things. These are common, Hunter. Well, Greg wants to talk. Let's get Greg in here. I see Greg chomping at the bit. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I mean, I was trying to think of the name of it, but there was a documentary a while back that, in Western cultures, I mean, what you do is somebody experiences what myself or Hunter does, and, you put them in the mental hospital, you get them on psych meds. And, in a lot of other cultures, they kind of see that as a gift, so to speak. And it's like, they'll bring them in and nurture them, and the shaman will talk to them and all that kind of stuff. Obviously that's more difficult to do in this society and day and age. And people, want to protect and kind of rightfully so. So it's not an easy, it's not an easy answer. Myself, was someone who wasn't like, hey, let me go check myself into the mental hospital. I was one that, the cops would come get me, put my hands behind my back most of the time, take me to the mental hospital, because I had a, family who had the wherewithal to get me petitioned and put in the hospital and that sort of thing, which, in reality saved my life. But, for some people that doesn't, work, and they find that very, demeaning and breaking people's rights and whatnot. So it's just complicated.
It is complicated, but it isn't, because treatment works, and when people cooperate with treatment, they get better. And when they get better, they look back and go, who left me like in that shape? Who let me behave like that and stay in that shape when I was so sick? And let's remember, bipolar disorder, manic patients are more likely to kill themselves when manic than depressed. This is a misconception people have. More likely to kill yourself in a mania than in a depression. Very common. And addiction is a illness that progresses to death. You die of addiction, both life-threatening problems. And it'd be great to also consider you special and, and being a shaman and all those good things. I have no problem with that at all. But to let it, a fatal illness just progress is troubling to me. So that's my thing. Hunter, thank you for calling, buddy. You're fine. You're good. Yeah, I love working with bipolar patients and alcoholics and addicts because they're extraordinary and they're creative and they're smart. And to the fact that you have to feel marginalized because of those conditions is weird to me. So I'm sorry you have to feel that way.
Well, thanks for your support, man, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. Really appreciate it.
You got it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Hunter.
Drug use also cause the bipolar disorder?
These are we're not getting into the nuances of diagnosis.
They also they really fed the denial for me, because I would for years was like, well, if the drugs really aren't a problem, if I just take these psych meds, I'll be okay.
Right.
I don't really need these psych meds if I don't do drugs. And it was just like this, really feeds that denial, which one of the sponsors just told me.
You literally, Susan, you literally, when you have somebody using.
Yeah, I saw Paulina go through it.
Yeah, but you literally can't tell it's either or both or which causing what. You got to just kind of treat both, and then you see where you are.
And the recovery is very similar for both too, other than
and these are common things. Ilana, I think you've changed your picture. What's going on?
Hi, Drew, and hi, Emma and Greg. So what I don't really have a question. It's more of a statement. I live in Palo Alto, and my kids went to the high school that had 2 suicide clusters in 6 years. The CDC did come out to investigate. And the problem is it's still continuing on. And, the schools talk a lot about mental health and support, but there's so much. I mean, it's such a multifaceted problem and issue. There's a lot of academic bullying by peers. There's academic requests from the parents. So it's just it's a very sad situation in an area that financially has support to be able to help. And then you're having the post-traumatic.
Well, let me. I'm going to say something.
Go ahead.
Allow me to say something that I did. I was screaming earlier about this rapid fire story thing I was commenting on Kilmead's show. But one of the things I commented on was Tom Brady being very fearful what money, his fame and money was going to do to his kids. And I knew people would react to that very negatively. They were extremely harsh on him, like, oh, it's so horrible to have all that privilege and money. But what you're talking about, you're kind of talking in the same zone here. And it prompts me to say mental health problems develop in all aspects of our human society. The one thing I will tell you, again, having worked at a psychiatric hospital for decades, was the very rich and the very poor were the groups that were overrepresented in the psychiatric hospital. They're the ones that had the most stuff going on. But it occurs everywhere. And because it's a school, Ilana, with privilege and resources, doesn't mean there aren't their own significant mental health struggles.
Oh, there absolutely are. There absolutely are. And it's interesting how just, you see the ones, I don't know.
Go ahead.
And my kids have,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've seen real effective in wealthy schools and not so wealthy schools is just the the point of getting young people involved is being part of the solution. In our film, there's a group called Hope Squad that's has groups around the country, but it's basically that peer-based suicide prevention or just, wellness thing where this issue is so big. If the young people aren't involved, they're really on the front lines of this, suicide epidemic that's taking 20 young people a day in the United States. We really got to do that. I mean, I think that's one thing that parents can really advocate for, teachers can really advocate for, because we've seen in the recent time so many people up in arms and going to the school board about pretty trivial things, in my opinion. But parents have a lot of power to really go and advocate for mental health and opportunities for peer groups and in high schools and junior highs and stuff like that, because nothing really of significance is going to take until it's really kind of demanded and more people are standing up. We saw this with the school shootings, which is obviously horrific, but it gets tons and tons of attention, and we've lost literally 100,000 more kids to suicide than we have in school shootings. And how much attention is really given to that and resources devoted to that. And so I think we definitely got a lot of work to do, but there are a lot of great people doing work already. So.
And Miss Kitty over in Rumble is saying, you make drug addicts of children by placing them on these meds. Then when they turn 18, they have full-blown drug addiction. No, Miss Kitty, the data shows exactly the opposite, in fact. And do not mistake a mood-stabilizing medication, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, a dual agent, a benzodiazepine, a opiate, a psychostimulant. These are all extremely different categories of medication. Don't get me wrong, overprescribing is a massive problem. I'm totally with you. But the things we have to worry about are the psychostimulants, the benzodiazepines, and the opiates. The others, have sort of, again, limited efficacy in adolescence, but they do not trigger addiction. In fact, even Adderall, even the psychostimulants, when I started seeing the meth epidemic happening in the 90s and early 2000s, because I always thought cocaine would just wipe meth aside. There would not be a big meth problem. And so when the amphetamines came on, I thought, it's got to be the Adderall. It's got to be we're causing all this, much like Miss Kitty is suggesting. But I looked at that data very carefully and monitored it for years, and it's not so. It's not so. But I do feel that if you continue psychostimulants after age of 18, you can get into trouble if you have the genetic potential for addiction. But again, addiction is a specific disorder. You can't make, you can trigger addiction, but you don't make an addict. So, all right. So, Lana, anything else? Thank you for coming up.
No, just to let Greg know, the students have requested and created and are demanding support and mental health support. And the school district and the parents are trying, but not to the extent of what the students want. So it's really interesting to sort of watch the whole thing. And my kids are out of the high school. They're older now, they're in their 20s. So, but I still feel very, like this was my school or this is my kid's school.
And again, all the COVID isolation and all that business made everything worse, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm. A bazillion times worse.
Bazillion times. That's a scientific term, right? Bazillion? Is that
Absolutely.
So,
We use it all of the time in my office. Yes.
All right, Alana, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see if we have time. We are running out of time here, guys. Shoot. A lot of people are wanting to ask questions.
You can go a little long if you want.
Yeah. Okay. Caleb, why don't you ask that question, and we'll let both Emma and Greg answer your question. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I was curious because of something that she had just brought up. I was wondering if there are any studies that have figured out what causes suicide clusters in schools. Like when it kind of seems like it washes over one group and then the next group. Is there a science behind that, or do they understand the reason why?
Greg, first.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I think there's some things with the contagion, but then there's some of these clusters where the kids didn't even really know each other or didn't know about the other person. So that's one of the, tricky things is, there's great researchers that are working on this and have been for years, but there's just so much that's really unknown that's, predictive and can really get down to the, to the why. There's, predispositions and, certain, things like if you've had a previous suicide attempt, or if you have you have history of mental health issues and stuff that, make you more likely that you may attempt. But I think not that I'm aware of to that question.
Emma?
Yeah, I don't think specifically there's any correlation just from my personal experience. I know from myself, I had a suicide attempt in June of 2017, and then shortly about a month later, a classmate of mine died by suicide, and I wasn't friends with him, just had seen him in the halls. So we were on two different sides of basically different groups of people, and he died and I had an attempt. And then similar to that, something totally was in Minnesota, there was a young girl who died by suicide, and then shortly after that, her boyfriend died by suicide. So I think it's all kind of circumstantial. I don't really think that there's correlation. Granted, in some instances, I'm sure there is correlation. But overall, from my experience and my knowledge, there isn't correlation.
Both Emma and Greg are right in that it's complicated and you can't point at one thing, Caleb. There is contagion of human behavior, and suicide is one of the things that becomes a contagious process, but it's not as powerful as we might think. You could also argue that whatever the circumstances are in that community or at that school that set off the initial suicide were influencing other kids in that area similarly, or whether it was lack of access or lack of openness to the idea of getting help, whatever it is. There's a million different reasons in terms of the environment and in terms of the individuals that can go this way. You can, for males, they're more likely to complete suicide than females. There's that. They're more likely to use firearms than females. But the women have been catching up in recent years, and it's sort of equalizing to some extent. So it's very hard to know exactly what all the factors are for a given so-called cluster. But you'll see, kids get cluster with eating disorder. They cluster with cutting. They cluster. That just tends to be the way things do go. And it's easy to say contagion, but exactly what we mean by that is not entirely understood.
Right.
So
I read about that, and it makes sense. It's just so strange to me that they haven't done any more like widespread studies to figure it out. It's like, well,
they're constantly trying to figure it out. Trust me, they're trying to figure it out.
What's the pattern to it?
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if you guys are involved with this new mental health helpline, this 988 line. Have you guys heard about this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Talk about it. Because this is here's one of the, well, let me just say, I just want to say that one of the success stories in suicide awareness is suicide awareness and suicide helplines. These have been shown to be impactful on the suicide attempts and rates. And now the government, I think wisely, is going, that worked. I wonder if we can do a mental health sort of emergency line, much like the suicide helpline. And that just got approved like last week. But Emma, you talk to that first, and then we'll have Greg talk about it.
Yeah, 988, that just got approved, I think, July 16th. And that was huge from my perspective, because I can remember being a teenager and I had heard of the 1-800 number. Obviously, when I was in school, the song by Logic wasn't out yet, so it wasn't that big of a deal in like mainstream media. But I had heard of the number, but never would I have ever thought to utilize that number, especially not in a moment of crisis. It's just not practical. It's not realistic to think that a youth in their moment of crisis is going to remember to make that call and use that number. So I think having it in a 3-digit number, similar to how 911, we all know 911, right? It's universal. So I think converting it to more of a universal, very easy to remember, you can teach your children that 988 is the helpful line. So I think overall, it's just going to be so much better and more useful in suicide prevention. I'm all for it, and I really am finally grateful that it's happened and it's finally come to fruition.
Good.
And
Greg,
so
your point?
it's been a number of years in the making. Some just amazing advocates really advocated for this. It was approved by the Senate years ago, and then the FCC just approved it 2 years ago. And so, for whatever reason, it takes a long time through all the different carriers and whatnot, and it went active on the 16th. But basically, it's a 24-hour crisis center. It's a former National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and so this is their new 3-digit number. you call, you get to talk to a licensed, or clinician who can kind of, hear what you're going through. Most of the calls are resolved right there, but they can also refer you to resources. The real cool thing about the expansion is it's mental health and substance use. So, when you call that, you're routed to a call center in your own community by your area code. So more than likely, if I call from, Louisiana, my area code, then I'm going to be talking to somebody in Louisiana. It's still really in development. It's one of those things that was kind of partially funded. And it really varies state to state as far as the robust nature of the resources that are available. Some have crisis mobile teams, some have a lot of beds and services and programs, some not so much so.
Well, we'll look forward to that sort of being built out. I know here in Los Angeles, if you remember, we had a thing called Teen Line that Cedars-Sinai put together. It was very successful, teaching adolescents how to do active listening to their peers, and they had a lot of great success. And makes me wonder if the 988 could have sort of a subcategory of peer-to-peer kinds of stuff maybe going on. You guys, we've kind of come to the end of our time together. I want to give each of you a chance to kind of wrap up. Greg, your last thoughts.
Sure. We just appreciate you shining light on this, issue of mental health and suicide prevention. I think one thing that we just need to always kind of think about, and the Surgeon General talks about it, is really addressing the upstream factors. It's really crazy to me that we're not, really engaging young people in much earlier ages, elementary school, high schools, with, mental health awareness and training and more social emotional learning, because unless we really start at a much earlier age, we're just going to continue to have these outrageous numbers of suicides and substance abuse. So we really got to start addressing this stuff earlier. So that would be my kind of big takeaway to leave with you. And we definitely would love to connect with people on the film and see what we can do to help you or your community or your organization enhance your mental health and wellness, and your empower youth in the process. So thanks for letting us be on.
So myascension.us. I'm glad we brought up the 988 number. I want to give you another video series out there about chronic mental illness and the resource available called Healing Minds NOLA. Healing Minds NOLA, meaning New Orleans. So it's Healing Minds NOLA, NOLA. Emma, your last thoughts.
I'm just so grateful and appreciative for this opportunity. Like Greg said, I knew that sharing my story was going to be a challenging journey, but it's certainly been one of the most rewarding journeys, mainly because by me sharing my story and sharing my testimony and my truth, it's allowed others to then step forward and get out of that denial that we were talking about, and let other people know that they're struggling and to reach out for help. So that's my biggest piece, is I just want to encourage people who are struggling to know that it is okay not to be okay, and you're not alone. And it is not a weakness to reach out for help. It's a sign of strength. So that's my takeaway for you.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I appreciate you so much getting out there and making a difference. This to me is the problem of our time. This is, you want to even point at all the divisions in this country and all the acrimony and all that stuff. Underneath it is a lot of this stuff too. So thank you for being a part of the solution. So we'll look forward to what you guys do next. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Drew. Appreciate it.
You bet. And coming up Thursday, Ed Lattimore. He's got some interesting ideas, a former professional heavyweight boxer, and now he's got some interesting ideas. He's just an interesting guy. I've seen him on Twitter for a long time. Grew up poor, public housing. He's got his own sort of ideas about how to get into the solution, and I'm anxious to hear from Ed. And as I said, in about a week, we're going to have the urologist in here. And one of our locals users was very interested in addressing the issue of childhood sexual abuse and pelvic pain and urinary problems, that kind of thing, which are exquisitely common. So, Susan, anything else before we say farewell here?
Make sure you go to drdrew.com/shop and use the code Drew to get a discount on your bobblehead, everybody.
There, I knew that was coming up here. She needs to move those bobbleheads.
I know.
Where do we go? Store?
They're so cute.
Shop. drdrew.com/shop. We still, I keep saying this, we owe Leopold a visit here, and I think Harley or something. Is that who else is up here? Yeah, Leopold and Harley need to have their own visit, and we got to do that for them.
We haven't been around, I guess.
I know. We've been.
They don't seem like they're in a hurry.
It's been our fault. Let's be fair. We've been.
Anytime.
Yeah. All right. Well, I haven't heard from Leopold in a minute, so we'll get that going. Let me look at Rumble.
He's living his life. He's on vacation.
He was on vacation for quite a while. People are advocating faith-based stuff. People are worried about medication, which I don't blame you. I really don't. But these are very serious illnesses, and you have to be with people that give a shit about the care of the patient, which is something we're losing in medicine. I hope COVID taught everybody that. Certainly taught me that.
Adam Kroll is going to be on Gutfeld tonight.
Yep.
So that should be very interesting.
We had a conversation with Greg about that last Wednesday after we went out to dinner with him.
I told Crystal.
You told Crystal about our conversation?
Yeah, but they did a podcast first, so hopefully they'll be able to iron out their
good, get their rhythms,
their
right.
evil minds together.
Fair enough.
Those two both remind me kind of each other.
Bit?
I
don't disagree
very
with that.
creative, the two of them.
Very creative.
Interesting combo.
All right. So we will be with you guys tomorrow and Thursday at 3:00 Pacific time. And let me look at next week. We're here.
Anthony Howard Brown is in the house.
I saw that. And we are here all through next week as well, right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
yes.
and maybe Friday also.
I don't know about...
We'll see about Friday.
Maybe, yeah. I know it's up to Caleb, but we're also thinking of bringing back a calling out, too. I'm trying to set that up.
Okay. Caleb, everything good with you? Any other questions?
Oh, yes.
Concerns?
Oh, yeah. Everything's going great. I'm, doing great. Camden's turning
good?
1 in 2 days.
Oh my God, I can't believe that.
I know.
Amazing.
Wow. All right, everybody. We will see you tomorrow at 3:00 Pacific.
Ta-ta.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. Young males start thinking of things to put their penis in. They do it. That's a thing that they do. And of course, something that is sucking that naturally, I'm going to try that. What he described was that the suction was incomplete on his testes, and so it was causing a flapping motion, and that was like a vibrator to his penis, essentially. And that's why he, a little cooler. Yeah, and that's why he had this orgasm, whatever. Anyway, I don't know what to do with you all. Hi, Hitler. I'm a 30-year-old woman.